Hello and welcome to the first episode of my Factorio new player basics tutorial in 1.0. For those of you who are returning to the game after not playing for a while, 1.0 has recently today launched, and for anyone new, which hopefully there are a lot of you who are new to the game finding this, who can hopefully find this helpful, welcome, and I hope you enjoy the game. But to get you started, I want to do a short little condensed tutorial on some of the basic, most helpful, important, and useful hotkeys and map settings to take a look at when you go to start the game. I did release my first episode of my tutorial Let's Play series, but I jam-packed a lot of information in that episode and it's quite long. I do think it's worth a watch, but I wanted to condense some of it for you in a shorter version here. Okay, so let's start with the map settings because that is where you'll start. I do want to mention though, I'm not telling you, I don't want it to come across as if I'm telling you how you need to play. You can play however you'd like, but I want to share some information with you that I've learned over the many years and many hours of playing, and just some things that may not be initially obvious or intuitive that can be really helpful to you. So when we go into single player, you can start with multiplayer if you'd like. It depends if you have friends to play with and stuff. You can hop on to the server, browse public games. I would not really recommend that for your first time. If you're going to play multiplayer, I'd recommend with friends for your first time, or single player. So if we go into single player, this is how I started. New game and load game. Load game is obviously loading a save game, and then we go into new game. And there's many different options here. There's custom scenarios, you can ignore those. Game scenarios, which is what comes with the game, and these include a bunch of different options here. But what we're looking at is free play, which is the primary mode, I would say. Or you can enter into the tutorial if you'd like. It is, an in-game version of some of the stuff I'm going to tell you, but not everything I'm going to tell you. It doesn't cover some of the stuff I'm going to mention. So we go to free play and next. And now we're brought into the map generator settings. And this can be quite overwhelming. A lot of it is intuitive. All these resources are intuitive. For the most part, these are the resources in the game you will have to collect and work with. And frequency, they give you little descriptions. I'm not really going to go too deeply into these here. Maybe I'll do a tutorial just specifically on map settings where we'll dive super deep into it. But this is basically how far apart your resource patches are, the number of them, the size is, well, self-explanatory. And then the richness is basically how much resources per patch there are. If you increase the richness, it may be 5 million instead of 1 million. If you reduce it, it may be 200,000 instead of a million, etc. So these are a little finicky, but for the most part, that's what they do. You can just drag them up and down for each resource, however you like. Terrain, again, fairly self-explanatory. This, a lot of the time for a newer player, you can just leave this default. Change maybe some things you'd like. But a few key things I want to touch on here is, first of all, in enemies. I mentioned this in my Let's Play, but I didn't actually show it. So in terms of enemies, you can do the same as you do with resources and basically change the number of bases and their size. If you're a little daunted by the idea of enemies, you can lower both of these down, so you maybe have less of them. At least to start with. They do expand as you continue through the game, but this will make them start less. Or you can do peaceful mode, which is a really nice medium. There's actually no explanation for this, but how this works is this basically turns on a thing in the game where it basically says, do not attack me unless I attack you, to the enemies. So the enemies will be completely docile until you attack them. So you can walk right up to them, stand in the middle of their base. You can build buildings all around them, except for military things, which would attack them. But you can build, assembling machines and whatever else. You can just stand in the middle of them and they won't attack you. But as soon as you or a turret you place or something like that shoots them, all the biters in your close vicinity will attack you. To clarify, this will not make all the biters in the entire map all of a sudden become hostile. It's just the ones around you. So you could shoot them, the ones around you will attack you, you kill all of them, and then you can move on to the next base and stand there and they'll be completely docile until you shoot them again. So this is how this works. This is a really nice medium if you just are kind of daunted by it, don't really want to mess with enemies in general unless you approach them, but still want them on. This is a really good thing to turn on right here. starting size, this increases, so this basically affects the area you have to work with, where biters are not allowed to spawn in initially. So the bigger it is, basically the farther away the biters, the enemies will be from you initially. Smaller will, of course, put them very close to you. You can change this how you'd like. All this is very advanced. I think this would be more appropriate for a specific tutorial on map settings. You really should not need to mess with any of this as a new player. And then in advanced, one thing I really want to touch on here is the research queue. So by default, this does not enable until you've completed the game. And you can leave it this way if you want. This is how the devs intended it. But personally, I really think this is a fantastic feature in the game, and I think you should just start with it. I think it's a great tool to have in the game. So I like to go here and just turn it to always. And what this means is your research queue will be unlocked from the start of the game. Obviously, as a new player, you may not really have much of an idea of what I'm talking about, but you do research in the game as you progress. A tech tree, any gamer knows what this is. But the research queue allows you to queue up these researches. So you can, queue up research A and then B and C and D into a queue. Whereas without this, you can't do that. You would have to select research A, wait for research A to finish before even selecting research B, let that finish, etc., etc. So I like to enable this. So again, a lot of this I'm not going to cover here. Pollution, you can probably just leave default. Don't even need to mess with that. Recipes, I would leave that the same with technology, except for this setting right here. Change it to always. And then peaceful, you can do what you like with this, but now you know what it does. So hopping, one last thing to touch on is preview. You can look at a map before you actually go into it. So if we do preview, this will generate a preview of a bit of the map, not the whole map. The map is massive, nearly infinite, not quite. And this is a preview. You can kind of see these are your resources. You can see where enemies might be. And if you don't like it, you can come up here to this button, random seed, and you can click it, and it will generate a new one for you, which you can preview, and you can do this over and over and over again. You can change settings, and it will change it. So if we do this, you can see that just changed what we had on the same seed. You can generate new seeds with this information, and then you can go into play and actually play and start the game. Now I want to show you some very quick things in terms of helpful hotkeys and general mechanics in the game, and that will close out this tutorial. So we're going to go here. This is a base I worked on earlier today in my stream. And let's start with some general hotkeys. Now you can access and change. You can change pretty much every hotkey in the game, but this is extremely overwhelming. Even for someone like me who's played for years, this is really quite overwhelming to look at. So this can be quite confusing, very hard to look through and memorize and find what you're looking for. There is a search button though, if you want to use that. But I will just tell you and show you some of the basic ones that I think are most helpful. The first one is rotating objects, which should be fairly intuitive if you play other games. You place an object down, left click, and you can hit R over it to rotate. You can also hit Shift R to rotate it the other direction. You can see I just rotated it now counterclockwise by holding Shift and hitting R, and then if I let go of Shift, I now rotate it clockwise. You can, of course, do this before you place it as well, before you actually click. Same thing applies. And that little ghosty icon there is when I'm holding Shift. That is how you place ghosts, which are for a later thing in the game. We don't need to cover those now. But if that confuses you, that's what it's for. That does not affect rotating or anything like that. It will, if you do hold Shift when you place it, though, it will actually not place the entity. It will place a kind of a fake version of it that's not actually there, which is what a ghost is. We'll go into that later. Okay, so there's that. Now some really useful inventory management and manipulation hotkeys. One major one, which you're going to want to and hopefully learn to use a lot, is with your control button. Okay, so one thing, when you start, what you can do is you can open inventories of items or entities by left clicking them, and then you can click and pick up stuff and put it in there. That can be very, very tedious early on. This applies especially when you have like burning mining drills, before we get all this automation, and you would have to do that. However, if you take an item in your cursor and you hold control, there's multiple variants of this. One I like is holding control and right clicking. And this is going to put half of what you have in your hand in here. Now you see the number of what I had didn't go down. That's because it just refilled it from my inventory. But if we dump all the coal, which I will show you that hotkey in a minute, and I take just 50, and I do it again, you can see we're now down to 25. So that puts half of whatever you're holding in your hand into the machine. Control right click. You can also do things like control left click. I do realize I'm being attacked here. This is, this is of course the danger of playing on an actual map and not a cheat map. Here's actually a great demonstration of a hotkey, is holding down space. Holding down space will auto-target enemies for you, which is very nice, instead of having to point and shoot. But back to what we were doing. Control left click puts your entire hand into the machine, or as much as it can hold. If you're holding, if there's already some in here and you're holding a whole stack, it may not be able to put it all in there, but if it can, it will put the entirety of what you have in your cursor into the machine. So that's what control left click does. Control right click does half of that. And you can drag these. So I can hold control and just right click drag across them, and it is so much faster. Kind of reverse of that, control left click on a machine will take out everything in it. So in this case, it took out the coal. If I go to these, it'll take iron. Control left click again, can just drag. As we come over here, again, I'm going to hit spacebar. Get rid of those guys. Nice and easy. You can manually target things. I'll show you that shortly. So if you control right click over a machine, it will take half of what's in there. So very similar, just reverse. It really changes based on if you're holding something in your hand or not. So if you're holding the thing in your hand, it'll put it into something. If you're not, and you just use that hotkey over a machine or entity, it will take from it. Shift doesn't do a lot. In fact, it doesn't really do much of anything for transferring inventories. Shift left click does nothing. Shift right click does nothing. However, this is a little bit of a more advanced one. I don't want to cover too much here, but this one is actually extremely useful. These are maybe not the best entities to test this with. If we do something with like assembling machines, which we are getting a little far into, well, not too far, but we are getting a little ways past the starting experience. So this is probably the most advanced one I'll give you for now. You can copy recipes very easily with a similar hotkey. So if we click on this to select a recipe, let's do boxes. It's a very early game familiar item. You could open this one and click it again, or you can shift right click, hold shift and right click, and it will copy this. And then you can shift left click, and you can see it's now highlighting in green this one. That means I've copied it, and paste it onto this one. So shift right click to copy, shift left click to paste. And you can do the same thing and just drag across them. Run down, and you can just copy. If you need to change it, just shift right click what you want to recopy, copy a different thing, and do it again. And it's fantastic. Really helpful, okay? So those are a lot of the main ones. You can use those control hotkeys directly from your inventory. So if you have like a box that you want to just put some of every type, like some of all of one type of item in, you mouse over the item you want in there, and then you control left click, and it puts every single item of that type in here. Control left click again takes it out. You control right click, it puts half, as we've discussed. Shift right click puts half of just this stack. So when you're in your inventory, it acts a little bit different. Shift right click actually does something here, puts half of the stack. Shift left click puts an entire stack at a time. If you control left click your entire in an empty spot, it'll transfer the entirety of your inventory that will fit into wherever you're putting it, if the thing can accept it. Obviously, you can't be putting a lot of this in like assembling machines or something. This is mostly useful for boxes. I believe these shift keys maybe do something here. with an item. They actually don't. So it really just interacts within your inventory. One last one I want to touch on. This is just basic stuff, guys. There's so many more hotkeys, but actually two last ones I want to touch on, and we'll wrap this up. First one is actually one that probably should have been covered initially, but that can throw you off a little bit depending how you use it, is the Alt key. So by default, the Alt key turns on and off what we call detailed information or advanced info. And you'll see when I do this, these little arrows disappear. As does the icons over things that shows what they're making. You can see these furnaces are now blank. They're still working, but it's not actually telling me what's in them. And then if I hit it again, it does. Okay. The reason this can be a little finicky is, as you might imagine, Alt-tabbing. If you Alt-tab a lot, it turns this on and off. You may want to rebind this, or not. If you Alt-tab and it turns off when you come back in, you can just hit Alt again to turn it back on. But this is very, very useful, and I highly, highly recommend you have this on, because it just makes placing things and feeding things and just identifying stuff in your factory way easier. You can imagine if this was off and it doesn't show stuff in assemblers either, it would be very hard to track down where you're actually making stuff in assemblers. In fact, it won't even show you what's in a chest until you mouse over it. So having this on, I think, is an absolute must. And then the last one here, in case for some reason you need to clean up a belt, maybe you've messed something up and you have a material on a belt you don't want, or you want to just pick items up off a belt instead of from things. If you hold the F key and run over, and you can kind of hear that little sound it's making, that will basically vacuum or hoover up a belt underneath you and pick up everything that's on the belt and put it into your inventory. And this, again, is very nice for cleaning up mistakes or just picking up resources from a belt without having to go to machines and such like that. And there we go. I believe that's going to do it, guys. There are more hotkeys. There's some crafting hotkeys. I suppose we could touch on those really quick. They're really pretty simple. Left-clicking obviously crafts. Right-clicking crafts 5 of something. As you can see here, it crafted 5 of those. And then shift left-clicking crafts the entirety of the thing as long as you have materials for it. So we have materials to make 331 of these. Well, we're now going to craft 331 of these if I shift left-click. That's something I almost never like to do. Right-clicking cancels crafting queue, so I was just right-clicking on those, or shift left-clicking does that. So yeah, shift left-clicking cancels the whole thing, and there you go. Those are your crafting hotkeys. That can be useful later on. Initially, you may not be making things in mass to where a lot of that won't be used, but there it is. Anyway, guys, that's the tutorial for you. I hope this found you helpful and just gets you started a little bit into the game. Like I said, there's so many more hotkeys, so much more to do with the map settings, but those are for different, more advanced tutorials, I think. This is hopefully not too long, hopefully condensed enough for you, and if you do have additional questions, do let me know, but I just wanted to keep this to the basics. There you go. As always, thank you so much for watching. I do hope you enjoyed. If you're new here, feel free to subscribe for more content like this, more tutorial content, more gameplay content. Factorio 1.0 is a huge release. I will be making a ton of content on my channel for Factorio. And if you did enjoy, a like is appreciated so other people can find it and hopefully find it helpful as well. Anyway, take care, guys. And until next time, I look forward to seeing you all, and do take care.